Good morning and evening for some of you. We are here for the first lore team AMA, actually, that is focused purely on the lore team and the writing of DuskBreakers, the story so far, and maybe some things for the future. I'll introduce everybody kind of one at a time, and then you can give a little spiel about yourself and what you do at Metatheory on DuskBreakers. So starting with Molly. Welcome this morning. Tell everyone your role and what you do here.
Cool. Hi. Yeah, my name is Molly. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a writer and I would say narrative designer here at Metatheory. Yeah, and I also help with the world building. So my background is more in crafting narratives for like podcasts, short films, anything that's like fun, fun and goofy and needs a story. So yeah, I help build out the world and then figure out what stories we can then tell within the world we've built.
Excellent. And then we'll move on to Sim. Hello, Sim.
Hello.
Let's just tell everyone a little bit about your role here and what you've been working on at Metatheory on DuskBreakers.
So my focus is primarily world building, especially the science fiction aspect. I a long time ago, I originally wanted to be a scientist, and I actually fell in love with world building and science fiction itself. And that's been sort of my core focus. I don't spend a lot of time on narrative or dialogue. My job is basically like, how did the burst work? Like, what did it do to the Earth? How did the technologies work? How do the Gribbles reproduce? Things like that. And I love my job, so yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, sounds good to me. Next, we've got Warlock, aka Peter. Peter, same question, same intro.
Hi. Yeah. So pretty. First of all, my name is Peter. You guys might know me as Warlock or Lorelock way back in the day when, I started off writing little fan stories for People's Breakers. Gosh, I guess over a year ago now, which feels like lifetimes. I have a pretty extensive background in esports, specifically collegiate, and a lot of like tabletop and just gaming history in general. And with DuskBreakers, I do a lot of flex work. I help out our very talented writers with a lot of organization and things like that. I do a fair bit of copy for things that go out publicly, and then I work on some other fun projects that will be a little more secret for now. But yeah, so kind of all over the place. Don't really do as much world building anymore. We have the very talented Sim for that, and Molly and Tavius. I definitely have a stronger focus on characters and things like that specifically. So, but yeah, kind of a jack of all trades.
Nice. And yeah, hearing esports, I'm like, man, it does feel like a lifetime ago. And then finally, David, who has been on these AMAs before. Let's reintroduce David and give everyone a sense of your role here.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Joshy. Hey, everybody. David, one of the co-founders here at Metatheory. Currently head up all of our creative. So I touched on our concept art, 2D and 3D, touch on our world building and lore, and quite a bit of our brand design and development as well. So also a little bit of a jack of all trades.
Excellent. Glad to have all of you here this morning, and I believe the team wanted to start this off with a video. If Warlock is able to screen share when he's ready, we can set it up a little bit before actually playing it. But Molly, I believe you've got some context for us?
Yeah, I'll share about this as Peter's pulling it up. Cool. So yeah, I'm not sure if everyone here has gotten a chance to check out the like rough timeline of our world on our website, but we've been playing around with that and it's still flexible as we build the world out. But we wanted to kind of take our general timeline and add a little bit of character flavor to it. So as hopefully most of y'all know, we have a place in our world called the Shadow District, which is kind of like the opposition of the corporate dust tech in Machafuko. And of course, if you have a shadow district, you gotta have a conspiracy theorist that runs their own pirate radio show in the shadow district. And for us, that is Rain Skavorsky. So yeah, he is kind of like the conspiracy theorist of the world, who creates this like Shadow District radio stream about how Dust Tech may not be telling the full truth. So we're gonna hear a little bit from him.
Okay, everyone who is on stage, make sure you pull up the shared screen now from Warlock so you can see the video that they've created. I do want to remind everyone there's also a chat attached to the stage that's an icon in the top right on Discord. It's got a little mini chat. I dropped a link there, duskbreakers.gg/lore. There I see Warlock and Vinland is here. Good morning. So if you do have immediate questions, you can actually write them right there. I will look through the other channels as well. I know we do have some questions loaded up, but the presentation and interview style questions will come first, and then audience AMA toward the end of the hour. So okay, again, here is Rain Skavorsky. Peter, whenever you're ready.
Okay, screen sharing on stages is a little weird, so if you guys can't hear it for some reason, let me know. But we should be good.
Hello, my fellow truth seekers. This is Rain Skavor. I'm here to expose the lies that Dust Tech wants us to believe. This is the story of how we ended up here, in this dystopia, in this world ruled by the corporations, and it's not what they want you to think. This whole thing started in 2025, the good old days. When we returned to the moon, we were on the brink of creating true AI, and we were on the path to reverse the effects of climate change. But as we all know, the sun had other plans. That same year, a massive burst of plasma erupted from the sun and triggered a geomagnetic storm that destroyed our electric grids, satellites, and gas lines. Every inch of the world was plunged into darkness. And then the pure chaos began. Governments struggled to maintain control, and soon warlords emerged. They controlled the food, water, and fuel, and their power grew as the world fell apart. In 2029, the fighting reached a state of equilibrium as the warlords became quasi-states, each controlling a few fortified cities. They forced their subjects to work for them in exchange for protection. These neo-feudal nations eventually overtook a few remaining pre-burst governments entirely. Energy infrastructure expanded, and corporations resurfaced. Oligarchs loyal to those warlords ran most of the corporations, creating monopolies, and by the 2070s, the oligarchs had ousted the old generals turned lords, and the corporate states were born. And just when we thought things couldn't get any worse, the Dusk arrived in 2082. The nations of Africa, the only nations fighting for a sustainable future, were distracted by the Dusk and the salvation we all hoped it would bring. From their allegiance and with the worldwide corporate oligarchs, Dust Tech was born. But let me tell you, my friends, the Dusk is not what it seems. The ruling elite want us to believe that the crew of the Dusk is dead, that ship is derelict, but how do we know that? What if it's a weapon? What if it's here to watch us like ants in an ant farm? Nobody really knows, but Dust Tech thinks it do. They assume the most profitable explanation, the one that justifies careless exploitation and the conversion of thousands of regular humans into cybernetic laborers. A space elevator built from the materials pulled from the depths of the Dusk now connects to the very place where humanity was born, spanning a distance of 36,000 kilometers like a giant umbilical cord. With it, Dust Tech is recklessly stealing technology from an advanced civilization, acting like a child playing with a dangerous weapon. We have abundant resources on Earth that we should be utilizing to save ourselves. It is time for us to step up and be brave and rely on our own capabilities. If we fail to do so, we may bring upon ourselves a disaster that will make the burst pale in comparison. This is Rain Skavorsky signing off from the Shadow Pirate Stream. Keep fighting and keep dancing.
Well, that was interesting. Very nice presentation.
Cool, yeah. Shout out to Tavius for who is actually one of our co-writers who will be at the AMAs at 9 o'clock tonight for doing the voice for Rain Skavorsky. But yeah, so as you know, we want to create a world where there's a lot of different like perspectives, and everyone kind of has, every character has their theory about why the dusk arrived and what its true purposes are. So this is kind of an example of like one of those viewpoints.
Awesome. So yeah, now that we've got a bit of an audience here, some of the topics that have come up a few times are things related to, well, politics, I guess, but first, let's go back a little further to the burst itself. You know, the general understanding is that our world is ruined in some way. Everyone's now focused all the technology in Machafuko to attach to the Dusk because essentially we found some cool stuff up there. So the questions that we've gotten in Discord are generally about Machafuko, the state of the rest of the world. They want to see other districts and things like that. But what was the world like when the Dusk arrived? Was it same day, same week, same, you know, event as the burst and the Dusk arriving, or chicken and the egg, you know, savior status? What I guess I'll direct this at Molly. Clear up the timeline a little bit for us and what happened.
Yeah, totally. So the idea is, you know, we wanted to create a world where like humanity was kind of on the edge of extinction by the time the Dusk arrives. And whether, you know, that's a coincidence, a Deus Ex Machina or not, is to be unfolded throughout the narrative. But so yeah, the burst and the decline of human civilization happened about 100 years before the Dusk arrived. And I'll let Sam talk a little bit about what exactly the burst is and what it did to the world, and then what the state of the world is then when the Dusk arrives. If you want, Sam. And feel free to kick it back to me if you have any at any point, Sam.
All right, sure, no problem. I just want to say that is an example of the kind of collaboration I do with the lore team. I wrote out something that probably felt kind of dry and boring, and then Tavius came in and gave it a lot of character and make it feel like more like a character in a story. And when I was, you know, while working through this, I'm trying to imagine how we got into the situation in detail. And of course, starting with the burst, what is it? Like, what, you know, was it a solar flare? So I did some research on that and started digging into something called a coronal mass ejection. And a coronal mass ejection is where a big bubble of plasma basically burps out from the sun and crosses interplanetary distances at incredible speeds. And if it hits the Earth, what it actually does is compresses the magnetic field of the Earth. And when you move a magnetic field around, it can induce currents in like wires, metal pipes, and things like that. So if this were to happen, and if it were sufficiently strong, like there was the 1859 quarantine event, for instance, that telegraph machine's on fire. If that were to happen today, it could potentially annihilate our entire electric grid. It could basically destroy transformers, which take months to years to replace. It could, like Rain Skavorsky mentioned, it could induce a current in a metal gas lines and explode them. It would be really bad. And so the thinking here is things aren't looking too great in a lot of ways if you just pay attention to the news, but there is some good news in there. Like we were on a path to a really bad path in terms of climate, but the decline of solar panels, or the decline in price of solar panels, has made it competitive with fossil fuels. So wind power, fossil fuels. So if we keep on our current trajectory, we can probably avoid the worst case scenario. And there's other things too in terms of technological innovation that could result in a brighter future. And the idea here is this coronal mass ejection, which could have happened. We nearly had one in 2012. It just missed by a matter of days or weeks. If that were to happen, it could derail everything, right? It could collapse society, and we'd be back essentially starting all over again and having to rebuild. And the idea here, so we were on a fairly good path, not the best, and we got knocked off into a bad trajectory, bad future trajectory. And that's basically the role of the burst in the timeline. Yeah. Back to you, Molly.
Yeah, that is the darkest timeline. And so, yeah, basically the world is plunged into Mad Max era for like 100 years with, warlords and everything. Slowly, like, corporate governments start popping up and taking control back from the warlords by this point. The map of the world does look very different with, borders and countries having dissolved and reformed and made new alliances. So by the time the dusk arrives, the world is still suffering due to the climate changes and lack of resources, but there's like some semblance of government control reestablished, which then allows them to begin the space race to the dusk upon its arrival to try to figure out what it is and get inside it. And then eventually leads to like the government leaders who are in charge, who still have resources, do come together to eventually form Dusk Tech and take control of the dusk in that way.
Awesome. I think that does paint a much clearer picture, and I'm curious, I guess my first question would be, for the world population, since it is a massive event like that, did the world's population also drain significantly by the point the dusk arrived 100 years later? Are we talking like 1/10 of what existed, or half, or any significant amount, Sim, maybe?
Yeah, so we haven't really, I played around a little bit with the numbers because, if the burst wiped out 90% of the world, right, a lot of these issues with like resource shortages and climate and those would all go away because there's not enough people to cause a problem. So it's not that. So we can say that's the extreme upper bound, right? But also, a disaster like that, obviously, if you took out the world's electric grids, it could kill millions, hundreds of millions to billions of people. But we don't really, the scary part is we don't really know how bad it would be, because nobody's run this experiment, thank God. So I think we have a lot of leeway writing-wise. So I was imagining it was probably less than 1 billion. We recovered. It caused a societal collapse, but not to the point to where like a huge portion of the world was dying off. And in that chaos, once we recovered and political order had dramatically shifted because of that perturbation in society, because of the other factors like environment, food shortages, water shortages, just because of a lack of sustainability, a lack of international cooperation, too much greed, I would imagine the population probably declined over the following 75 years. But not to the point to where there's like, it's like The Last of Us, where there's a few like 2,000 people clinging on or whatever. So there's billions of people, but we haven't nailed down the exact number yet.
Gotcha. And I realize that might be morbid, but it does matter as far as like rarity of resources when the dusk does arrive, and things like how special is a breaker if there's only 10,000 of, you know, X humans on Earth. So thank you for that reference.
Yeah, we're thinking it's at least like 4 to 5 billion people remaining
Nice.
at a minimum. Because anything beyond that, anything below that, you've already had your world, end of the world.
Right.
Right, so there's not a lot to save there if you only have a like single-digit percentage of the human population left. So.
Yep, and this is like a segue to paint the picture of DuskTech, which obviously is now in control of the lift and, you know, gathering resources. So I think, David, this would be a good time to ask you about perhaps DuskTech in general, and perhaps the first team of DuskBreakers once the dusk does arrive. Could you paint a picture there, or are you here?
Yeah, no,
okay,
I'm here.
just making sure.
Just waiting to hear your question. Yes, actually, I could paint that picture, but I actually want to know if Molly would like to jump in.
Cool.
I know the writing team has a deep abiding love for our Linda Way and our original team, and maybe since you're our character expert, you could paint a quick profile of each of the original members, if you're up to it, Molly.
Oh, I'm always up for that. Yeah, so we're tentatively calling them our alpha team of DuskBreakers, and this is the first like squad that Linda Way forms after entering the dusk. So yeah, to set up Linda Way a bit, she is, we also want her to be from Africa, from nearby. You know, when the dusk appeared, she realized that her like eyes glowed and felt this like connection to the dusk. And she is already a scientist and someone who has a disability. So she has an AI assistant that like helps her with her monitor her like breathing and different needs she has with her disability. And so she gets herself on a space exploration team to go explore the dusk. No one has been able to find this entry point to the dusk, and she's the one that discovers the duskite orb, which is essentially a doorway that once you go through it, you are changed by the ship forever. And because she did have this like assisted device with her as she went through it, you know, that also updated her body and became like part of her body. There will be more on that later. Yeah, so once she was able to enter the ship, she then, you know, went back to Earth, talked to the leaders who had sponsored her trip, and together they put together the Alpha team. And so she recruited her childhood best friend Makono and his husband Moyo, who Makono is kind of our tank. He's like this very gregarious teddy bear of a guy who is very protective over his people. Moyo is more of the kind of like nerdy scientist. He's a little more you know, objective, doesn't let emotions get in the way. And then the government officials put their friend Tundle Fisher on the team. Tundle's a bit of a character who he kind of like, no one really knows where he came from, but he does end up being a Dustbreaker and able to get on the ship. And then our last person we have rounding out the team is another younger woman named Bix, who is also like a combat specialist, and together they are the first team that for years are working on exploring the dusk and crafting the space elevator for the dusk. When Tundle Fisher has his very first death and regeneration experience, he sees that as a religious awakening and decides to form a cult around that. So he eventually leaves the Breaker team to become the head of the Believers of the Broken. Yeah, and then over the years, you know, Linda Way's relationship with Dusk Tech and relationship with the Dusk evolves too. But yeah, at the core in the early days, those were just like the 5 people that were working on the ship, working to figure out how to recruit more DuskBreakers and building up the elevator. Did that answer all the questions, Joshy?
Yeah, I think could I ask one of the writers to write all those names in the chat so that I don't say them incorrectly? I remember Tundle for sure.
Yes, Tundle's unforgettable. Tundle Fisher, Moyo and Makono, who are, by the time we enter our story after, so our story begins about 10 to 15 years after the original team had, kind of founded the DuskBreakers initiative. And so by this time, Moyo and Makono are retired and own a tea and bar called M&M's.
Ah.
Well, it's not called M&M's. It's called Double M's, but it may have a sign similar to M&M's. And I'll finish writing.
Excellent. Well, then I guess my next question leans toward discoveries on the Dusk. If the first team went up and started poking around, that means probably one of them encountered alien life for the first time, right? In our historical timeline. Is there a specific story about that we've got to tell?
I'm sure there is. Yeah, I mean, they definitely discovered the Gribbles for the first time, and the main thing is they discovered that the ship was, all made out of this similar, super advanced nanite technology, later called Duskite, which can basically be programmed into anything, and that is the resource that allowed them to create the space elevator.
Nice. So the space elevator, of course, the Kinshasa lift is a monumental engineering feat for humans at this point.
Yeah, definitely. And if we want to hear a little bit more about like our thinking around it and how realistic it is, I know Sim did a lot of research into space elevators as we were designing it.
Yeah, please, Sim, enlighten us about the Kinshasa lift and our thinking behind it, the design and things for the story and everything.
Yeah. To answer your question too about like what they encountered first going into the Dusk, briefly, I would imagine their first reaction was bafflement, because you have this giant ship that navigated itself into a solar system, parked in geostationary orbit, and just sat there. That didn't really do anything. And that's weird. So then they go in, as like you would expect if you're going into an alien spaceship. You would, expect aliens to like, do their equivalent of handshake and say hi, but there was nobody to talk to. There's this like flora and fauna and strange alien technology, so it's a huge mystery. Like, why did the ship show up and then just not engage with humanity in a very easily understood way? So that kind of just led Dusk Tech and a lot of researchers to conclude it's a derelict, it's defunct, something went wrong, and it's there to exploit. And that exploitation led to the space elevator. So now the space elevator concept, I did a lot of research on it, but it was kind of easy in a way because I didn't have to just make a bunch of stuff up. The space elevator concept is a real engineering concept that, if we're lucky, like if we have sufficient breakthroughs in like real life nanotechnology, like graphene, carbon nanotubes, diamond nanothreads, it's conceivable that something like this could be built. In fact, China and Japan are both claiming they want to have a functional space elevator by 2050. I'll believe it when I see it, and hopefully I'm still alive. But it's not impossible. This is something that could be built, and essentially what it really is you take a hyper strong cable, a tether, or a ribbon, some hyper strong material, and you drop it down to the surface of the Earth and anchor it to something. You either anchor it in the ocean, or you could anchor it on land, and centrifugal force keeps it tight, like kind of like taut. It's like think about grabbing a ball, a weighted ball, and tying a string to it and swinging it around your head, and that centrifugal force keeps that line tight. And the elevator cars would be like the equivalent of a little ant crawling up the string as you're spinning it around your head. Imagine your head's the Earth. And what that does is it eliminates the need for rockets to get to space. The most costly, difficult thing about getting into space is launching a rocket up to sufficient velocity, orbital velocity, into low Earth orbit or beyond. And if we can eliminate that and just build a structure where you hop on an elevator car and just go into space, it could reduce the cost, the extreme cost of reaching space by orders of magnitude. And this is sort of like what SpaceX is trying to do, right? They're trying to use reusable rockets to reduce the cost of reaching space. And the space elevator is an extreme example of that, like that hopefully we can pull off someday.
Nice. And obviously lots of anime have space elevators. No, I'm just kidding. There's been a lot of sci-fi examples. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, you have it seems to be growing in popularity, which I love. It's one of my favorite sci-fi concepts because it's possible. And that you have the space elevator in Halo. If you played Halo ODST and got to watch it collapse, fun fact: if a tether like that broke towards the top, it would wrap around the Earth.
Wow.
So you had the one in Foundation. I don't want to spoil that, but there's a very dramatic scene involving the space elevator in Foundation. And yeah, there's a few other examples here and there. It's actually a very old concept that I think that's over 100 years old. Goes back to a Russian physicist.
Wow.
So it's actually a really old idea. It's just only now is it gaining popularity because there's a real possibility that we could build this thing because of breakthroughs in nanotechnology.
Cool. Well, that actually is a pretty clear historical picture now of DuskBreakers, where we're at, how DuskTech got this elevator attached, and now we're sort of at the present where I think the general understanding from the audience is there are gribbles aboard, there are minerals for us to gather. What we've seen in Twilight Shift, could anyone here just kind of refresh us on the Red Warrens and what is sort of taking place in our game that we've presented so far? Molly, I see you unmuted.
Yeah, totally. Happy to. So yeah, one of the things I love about the Dusk is that we're not designing it like any human concept of a ship. We, at every step of our world building, we try to push like what we as humans would assume would be possible because we want to make it a truly alien environment. And so the Twilight Shift game just takes place in the first zone of the Dusk, but there are many, many more zones of the Dusk that have different landscapes and creatures and all sorts of other exogems and materials in there too. So we're really just getting into kind of like the crust of the Dusk in that first zone, which we call Zone 1, and then it's like within that zone is an area called the Red Warrens, and it's called that because there's been an explosion of vologems. We call the kind of like crystals in our games exogems. They're made out of like 4D material, and they have all sorts of powers, and the vologems are named such because they're pretty volatile, but they provide a lot of energy. And for some reason, which it does have a narrative reason, but I can't reveal it yet, this area has an excess of vologems, but is also very dangerous. People disappear in it a lot. And Zone 1 is also kind of like the main home for gribbles, because the gribbles use both the adnite and vologems, and they're reproducing, as we know, with like the gribble eggs. So yeah, it's kind of like a rocky, cavernous sci-fi terrain filled with mostly gribbles, a few other creatures, some other like plants and alien plants and such, and then yeah, it's fairly dangerous area to traverse, but worth it for those sweet, sweet gems.
Yes, of course. and of course, the gems will have more use and revealed properties and things as we continue on in the story. I think we'll switch gears a little bit now since we have kind of got the full picture. I want to ask Peter, as a writer, this is going to be a big topic change here. ChatGPT and AI is basically where I'm headed here. We did ask the artists on the art team and their AMAs about this changing technology and what they were looking forward to and maybe not looking forward to when it came to the new tech. But Peter, I know that you've been playing around with some of these AI models. What is your take on using this new tech for meta theory and DuskBreakers writing?
Well, I think you could probably just give me and Dave the rest of this event, and we could probably talk everyone's ears off about this. Super exciting, super scary, as I think a lot of unexplored frontiers are. Literally this morning, people have been posting about compressing. Having GPT like compress its own messages so that you can get around like having context issues, and people are posting like entire stories. I mean, I've seen books where as soon as GPT-4 hit, it's like there's like an arms race of like, how can I create the best GPT-4 guide? But outside a lot of like the selling shovels in a gold rush, I think there's a lot of really exciting prospects here. I've seen a lot of really cool creative applications, and I've definitely experienced a few of those myself. I found that AI can be great for, I'm going to try to limit, I don't want to go just like totally off the walls here. It's really cool to get different tones in your passages. You can punch this in and you can say, hey, give me this passage in a tone of like a coal miner and also a business owner and also Kevin Lynn, and it will create like not perfect, obviously. It still lacks the human element. There's something where, and I think especially now as AI text is popping up kind of all over the place, there's certainly there's just something that you can feel that's missing. It's typically very formulaic right now, and people have been figuring out ways to get around that, and I think that will keep continuing as well. It's really exciting. I think it can free up a lot of the mental space that would typically go towards menial tasks, like checking copy, figuring out some like basic like brainstorming. It's a really good asset. It's not your primary tool, but your primary tool as a writer, as a storyteller, as a world builder, as a designer is always going to be your brain. But this is definitely a really powerful supplement to that, and I think that's already like proven the case here. We're working on some fun stuff. I'll let Dave talk a little bit more about that as much as he wants, because he's found a lot of really cool applications and he's way more technical than all of us. So true master of all trades. But no, yeah. Even in the writers, we found a lot of cool uses. It's helped with concepting, help with just pitching, and I think it's only going to get better, which is both really cool and really scary.
Yeah, thanks for that context. And Dave, since he offered you up, we'd love to hear more of your perspective on all this AI stuff.
Yeah, sure. I have been interested in AI for a very long time. It feels incredibly exciting to be sort of living in the just the space race towards AGI. It's really fantastic, particularly as a creative tool. I won't go on and yes, talk through the rest of our scheduled time here, but I will say, as a creative, it is very interesting to have to adapt your creative process from a highly individualized internal practice into one where you become more of a director and you are attempting to teach your creative process and teach another electronic entity of what you would like it to do. It turns everyone into a bit of a director, and I think that is a fun way to adjust the way that you look at how you as an individual undertake a creative act. I think it is something that can unlock creative abilities in people who maybe don't have confidence or haven't trained up or practiced their own sort of creative skills. I see it as something that can become a really powerful accelerant and force multiplier for an individual creative. Very, very exciting tech.
Excellent. I'm glad to hear that we're staying on top of cutting edge technology, and in fact we even used a little bit of AI in the video earlier that we showed. Sim, actually, I think I've seen you running some prompts as well to check against just even sci-fi stuff, or possible real science here.
Yeah, it's gone way beyond that at this point. Yeah, I've fallen in love with this thing. It is. I was very full. Just to be honest, I was very scared and apprehensive about it at first because, as a huge fan of science fiction, this feels like a science fiction plot. Like it's so surreal being alive in a time, like Dave is saying, where this is becoming a real thing. Like this is. I'm having a conversation with a machine, and a lot of the world building work I do now, a lot of times when I'm like, I still have to do a lot of the research myself because, unfortunately, at least ChatGPT 3, 4 is more accurate, but I have to fact check it a lot. It does get things wrong, but that's that's not quite the best way I found to use it. Where it really helps me when I'm doing world building and research is having discussions with it. Like I'll sort of like ask it what it thinks, and I'll sit there and go back and forth, and there'll be some things that misses. Like I'll say, what do you think about this? And that's so weird that I'm asking that of a machine. And then it will give a really good answer, and I'll say, I'll pick out the good points, and there'll be some things that miss. And I go, well, what about this? Have you considered this? And I just sit there and sometimes I get in arguments with it.
That's what Peter says you argue with sci-fi.
But those arguments are very productive. I find come across, so it's like having a fellow super nerd I can just sit there and talk to you about this stuff. And then in addition to that, like Dave was alluding to, because I'm so hyper focused on world building and the science stuff and the hard science, I'm not as strong when it comes to writing dialogue or designing characters. But what I can do is I can take my big old essay on the future history following the burst and all these events and stuff like that, and I can take sample text of a character and say, rewrite this whole thing in the voice of this character, and it's amazing, and it just does it in seconds. And you suddenly take a boring, dry academic signing essay about science stuff, and it's this rich, like in-universe, like monologue from a character or dialogue between two characters, or you do whatever you want. It's incredibly liberating and incredibly empowering if you have weak points as a writer.
That's awesome. And the fact that it's it's your job to do that, the arguing with the AI. It's don't feel bad about it. Just learn, and apply. So we are into kind of the last 15 to 20 minutes here. I'll ask, before we move on to audience questions, we do have a few loaded up. I'll ask David, was there anything you think that we should still touch on that maybe we didn't get to with that history of the Dusk, or any other details? I guess Machafuko and the districts are something we didn't quite touch on. If you want to give a little context on outside, the outside world at this point.
Yeah. No. Great question. I will say that I want to caveat all of our lore discussion with a note, and that note is that game development is a surprisingly sort of fluid process. It is tech, but it's also very creative. And the lore that we create is created in conversation with our other teams. You know, the people who are programming our tools, the people who are working on our website, the people who are creating our marketing strategy. And so the things that we come up with as world builders and lore writers and character creators, they oftentimes will have to shift and adjust as the needs of the project shift and adjust. So anything that we sort of go over here, there may be some small tweaks, there may be some small adjustments as we push forward and get ever closer to a more formal game launch that we are hoping to achieve for later this year, as we've discussed in some of our other AMAs. Yeah, I would say, you know, that caveat. I think I do want to give our content team an opportunity to introduce everyone to Machafuko in sort of the best way that they see fit. I think Machafuko is designed to be a future city. It's designed through an Afrofuturistic lens. It's a city with a lot of potential and promise, a lot of danger and excitement. We are still sort of crafting a map for Machafuko. And we're centering a lot of the city development around these grand structures similar to arcologies, if anyone's played SimCity. A large sort of housing block, self-contained, something that can be easily reproduced, almost 3D printed, and that houses large numbers of people, that houses things like gardens and farms, very walkable, if we're talking walkable cities, a place that is yeah, sort of a community-focused large building. Nothing too dystopian. We're not going Judge Dredd, but yeah, we're thinking, you know, what would a true city of the future, a city that was built in very short time, that popped up around the space elevator, a home to a great many immigrants and migrants from not just the continent of Africa, but across the entire world. A place where, you know, the great majority of human economic and scientific development is now centered. If a place like that popped up, what would that city look like, and how would the people who run that city, the people who live there, react? Those are some of the driving forces behind Machafuko, and it's a lot to balance. It's a lot to keep in mind. So yeah, just that's a little bit of flavor about the city. I'll leave stuff like the districts and some of the specific mapping to trickle out as we release more content and as we release game. But hopefully that gets some of you all excited to explore that city and spend time there later, hopefully this year.
That sounds great to me. And D-Lu, I see, is in our audience now. He is one who asked specifically about that, so hopefully that's a satisfying answer there. Let us know, obviously, in the chat if you've got any follow-ups on anything that we may have discussed here so far. For now, we've got some time left. I want to possibly go person by person here and ask what has been sort of your favorite thing to work on so far. We've pushed a lot of lore and webcomic some of you are involved in. So with certain characters, we have, we didn't even talk about Asha and Adrian so far in this session. We may, in the second session, again, reminder, we'll be going live again later this evening. There's another event here on Discord that you can RSVP to. But we've done a lot of cool stuff. So I'll start with just same order, I guess. Molly, if you've got a favorite part of your work at Metatheory or on DuskBreakers so far.
Cool, yeah, I definitely do. Yeah, my favorite part of world building, because I'm not a hard science person like Sim, is just getting to let my imagination run wild when we're just like when we're building out the dusk and like what these landscapes could look like and what the alien creatures could look like. I've always loved creature designs, and it's really fun to get to work with Sim, who does have more of an actual like ecology background and or speculative evolution background, and just kind of throw wacky ideas at him, and then he would tell me how this would could actually work in a galaxy far, far away. So yeah, getting to like I love Asha. That was a great design. That I didn't even have anything to do with that. That was all Gears. But I love just like the plant creatures. And then my favorite part of narrative is getting to build out like the wacky characters like Rain Skavorsky. I think what's nice about this world we're creating is like it technically is like a sci-fi dystopia, but we're trying to add a lot of levity to it with tone. We don't want it to just be like dark cyberpunk. Like we want it to have a lot of perspectives and have a lot of humor and joy in it as well. And so I think that's been a fun aspect with the range of characters we get to create.
Great answer. Sim, what has been your favorite part of working here, and maybe a specific narrative point?
I would say, I guess it's just the core of my job, really, that I've been loving, and that is, I love taking kind of like arguably absurd, implausible, magical, unrealistic science fiction ideas, and trying to figure out like, okay, I know this is fiction, but let's see, like, how would this work if it was real, right? So taking, for example, a classic example is faster than light travel in science fiction. It is like an essential component of a lot of space opera, because nobody wants to read a story unless you're really into hard science fiction about people taking decades to centuries to get from point A to point B. So we've created this plot device, created a plot device called FTL. Now you could just wave your hands and say, yeah, okay, yeah, it's magic, whatever. But I like going a step further and imagining like how would it actually work as a piece of technology. And some people in the actual scientific community have done this with like warp drives and wormholes, where there's a whole body of scientific literature on the subject that you can dig into. So I really enjoy taking like ideas like space elevators, FTL. What's so special about these exogems? Like physically, what makes them so unique, and digging into that. And a lot of times I actually go to Google Scholar and search for similar concepts and actually read through scientific papers to kind of mine them for as a way to flesh this out more and make it more immersive and more real. So I'd say that's my love. That's what I love to do the most, both inside of work and outside of work.
Excellent. And yeah, it's always great to enjoy your work.
As far as the narrative point, I think working out like how exactly the Gribble biology worked, like as far as how they were, you know, how they breed, how they interact with the characters and all that. Working through that, I love social insects. One of my favorite subjects is things like ants, termites, and bees. So it was incredibly fun to work that out and try to figure out how they interact with characters and fit into the world in Machifuko and the Dusk.
Excellent, and that's a big mystery, cool thing for players to discover as well. And Peter, same questions. What have you enjoyed most about being at Metatheory? You've been here over a year now, right?
Yeah, sure have. Other than the private lessons from Sim about how Gribbles work, and the massive ecology tutoring that would probably cost me hundreds of dollars. Favorite thing I've been involved in so far is easily everything associated with the visual novel. I have a very, very real, very distinct love for this world that we've built. But I would say even more so, I have a love for bringing people's stories in, and making sure that we have like the big guys, the Dusk obviously, but even down to the smallest, most like seemingly insignificant story. I've had a lot of fun just not only building those stories, but iterating on systems to continue building those stories and ways where we can kind of explore this world and can continue to make it real. And when I say real, I mean that, it is a living, breathing world. Like these people in Machifuko, I can't relate to a scary, massive spaceship or this huge mega corporation, but I can relate to like a clerk at the Machifuko General Store who's hanging out. And so I think telling those perspectives is definitely the most compelling thing to me.
Awesome. And do you have a favorite character? I think you've got one of your own, don't you?
If I had to give, I would probably say, of those that we've released, I would probably say Adrian is my favorite. Of course, I love my breaker Ophelia, who I earned through, that way back. But I think Adrian represents a lot of really cool ideas that we want to show in Machifuko, and I think that entire process was really fun. Also, I love Asha, so.
I agree on all of that. Thank you for that answer, Peter. And Dave will, I suppose, close the show with your favorite thing about working at Metatheory and DuskBreakers.
Oh boy. Yeah, that's a very tough question for me. I would say, I get to touch on a lot of things that I have a lot of fun with. It's not uncommon for me to be up to the single digits, just poking around with Stable Diffusion or with ChatGPT or trying to optimize some process that we have at work, and I do very much enjoy that. That's fun for me. But I think the thing that I love the most, it's definitely working with my team. Particularly centered around the world building. It's such a fun collaborative process to attempt to come to consensus and to build a fantasy world with people with completely different viewpoints, with completely different lived experiences. I have a great, really diverse team of people to work with, and I feel that figuring out how to build a world that we all can occupy and that feels living to each of us means that the things that we're creating are actually robust and actually interesting, and that's incredibly satisfying to me. If I had to choose a particular narrative point or character that's my favorite, boy, I don't know. That's really hard. I think I'm kind of partial to the Corrupted. I don't know. I just find the Corrupted to be fun and interesting and funny and a little scary. And yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, no wrong answers. Definitely reminding us of the Corrupted. He's still out there lurking. Who knows what's going on with the Corrupted. So thank you very much to everyone that was our guest this morning. Molly, Sim, Peter, and David. Very much appreciate all of you joining in and answering these great questions, reminding us about the burst onward, up to our Twilight Shift gameplay. So everyone should be all up to speed now. We got some great perspectives on your work behind the scenes here at Metatheory and DuskBreakers, so thank you again for your time. Everyone who attended in the Discord, I appreciate you as well. We've got another event later this evening, and I'm going to double check before I misspeak, but that is 7 p.m. Pacific start time, 7 p.m. Pacific, so about 10 more hours from here before we begin, and we'll have some of the same guests, but please do attend if you're able, and if you've got any questions, you can leave them in AMA chat. I did record this whole thing as well, so YouTube, DuskBreakers on YouTube is the easiest thing to search. You'll find our lovely channel and see all of our past AMAs there as well, with the art team and leadership teams, all the way back a year and a half or so, so we've got a great archive on YouTube. if you want to check this VOD out later as well. Thanks, team. Thanks, attendees. Everyone have a great rest of your day or night. We'll see you later for event number 2.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, y'all.
Thank you.